Welcome again, people. I'm here with my good friend Fernando, and we are at the very end of our sojourn or journey or what have you into the Yavanajataka. This is the last video. We're going to be covering the remaining chapters 72 to 79, right? One for each tarot card plus one. The blank card.
The Joker.
Yeah, the Joker. And then we will end with a conclusion and yeah, we'll be on our way. All right, cool. So let's share the screen without further ado. Okie dokie. So chapter 72.
You know, we should have added chapter 72 to last video because it's technically a continuation of chapter 71 in terms of figuring out the different syllables or morphones. I don't know if that's an English word, but basically the different syllables that might come up in a horary consultation through Navamsha. So that's the difference here.
Yeah, and this gets really, really intricate and esoteric, kind of like, I mean, not that esoteric, but like there's a pattern where it's like, you know, every Navamsha in every sign is given a what you'd say syllable, right? Or yeah.
And and he divides them with the fixed, cardinal, and mutable qualities of the sign, and he catalogs them in groups of 4. And may I add that, you know, I was verifying these syllables with the syllables that are given for the nakshatras, and they're not the same. They're different. So yeah, man. I mean, as we said in the previous video, this technique of figuring out the sounds of the name is very confusing. It's a complicated calculation that, you know, we require more Sanskrit expertise to really you know, talk about this in a erudite way, I would say.
Yeah. Hopefully at some point somebody who knows Sanskrit will come out with like an article about these chapters and like some kind of analysis that the rest of us could benefit from. That would be really cool. Because I think that, like, yeah, if I knew more about the language and how to use it in divination, these would be amazing tools. And these could also be used for like naming a child or giving a person a mantra, or, you know, coming up.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah, coming up with sound syllable related magic and stuff, you know, for the person, which is basically what mantra is in a sense. So, yeah. That would be cool. And yeah, actually, on the subject of mantra, just real quick, in these last chapters, I remember there were a couple parts where, or one part somewhere where he did attribute mantra to the 5th house, actually, just like it's usually done. So I thought that was cool to notice. Okay, so I guess like moving on, right? We don't really have to.
We talked about this in the previous video more or less.
Okay.
Chapter 73. We start off with a very different type of chapter. This is a very different introduction. We start reading about king, and it reads more like a novel than anything else in the first shlokas. So it's basically, you know, things a king should do.
Yeah.
And as people know, you know, astrology, the first type of astrology that originated historically verifiable is mundane astrology. And mundane astrology basically consisted of watching the omens in the sky. There wasn't really necessary horoscopic astrology. It was just watching the planets and how they moved in relation to the stars. And the priests would go to the king and they would, you know, talk to the king about the planets and what they meant in terms of the administration of the kingdom. And, you know, the king in a traditional society was the head of the state, and he was a very important figure. Hence, we have this chapter that really talks about, you know, the head of the state, because he was more or less, you know, intrinsically related to the old traditions of astrology. And what we have here is basically, you know, things about king. And in this chapter, for the very first time in the whole of Yavanajataka, we see nakshatras. We don't read the word. The word nakshatra is written for the first time in an upcoming chapter, but in chapter 73, shloka 11, from Shloka 11 till Shloka 18,
Yeah.
we see the first. There's going to be other mentions of the nakshatras by name later on, but over. This is like the first time we see nakshatras. This is amazing. This is amazing.
Yeah, and it seems like there's he also mentions tithis a little later on too.
Yes, and
which we've never seen before.
Yeah,
so it's obvious that there's a good amount of.
He starts mentioning them. I'm sorry. He starts mentioning tithis in Shloka 26. I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So Shloka 26 of this chapter. Yeah, it's like it's obvious. It becomes obvious that there's a good degree of knowledge that he doesn't mention outright, and that he sort of expects people to have, whoever wrote this, right? It's sort of like there may be another book on things like tithis and nakshatras, or that may have been something that was more an oral tradition, or that may have been something at the time this was written and taught, where it's like, just go read the Vedas. You should be like that. They would be studying the Vedic passages where they talk about nakshatras, right? Where there's a few small sections throughout the 4 Vedas, I think, right? Supposedly, I actually haven't read them myself, but I trust that that's the case. And then of course the Brahmanas, which are the commentaries on the Vedas, right, talk more about the nakshatras. And you'll find here that I found this fascinating, that he named some of the nakshatras based on their deities, like Savitra, right, instead of Hasta. Because I think, if I remember correctly, Savitri is the deity for Hasta. And the same with a couple others, although I'm not as familiar with them, like Andava from Mrigashira. But the one I did, the other one I did notice was Rudra. He says like Rudra or something. Yeah, Rudra for Ardra, right? Because Rudra is the deity given in the I forget which Brahmana it is. Shiva. But yeah, there's that Brahmana that has all the deities, that lists all the deities. So
which was the first one mentioned? I'm sorry. Which one? Hasta, right?
Savitri for Hasta. Yeah.
It says here Visvakarma.
Oh, really? Huh. So maybe I wonder if the deities were a little different at one time in one tradition.
Which other one?
Ardra.
Swati.
Oh, Swati. Oh, yeah.
Swati says Indra.
Swati says Anila.
Maybe they kind of change. Migrashira, what does it say there?
Aindava.
Migrashira is the moon, which would be Soma. Apparently they kind of changed.
Well, and then, but Rudra and Ardra is the same. Rudra and Ardra. That's
of course.
Yeah.
Shiva, Shiva,
yeah. So so you actually get like ways to use these nakshatras too, right? It's like literally like, okay, if the moon is in these nakshatras, like this is good, but this is not good, right? Like here at the top, if they're in this nakshatras, he should march in the afternoon and obtain treasure, so to speak. And then, but an expedition starting out in the morning in these constellations, nakshatras, is not good. Okay. And I don't, I'm not a nakshatra expert really. Like I know some of them better than others.
Nobody is.
Well, okay. Yeah, that's true. But there's some people I have a lot of respect for who know a lot more than me, like Dr. Arjun Pai and KRS and they really know a lot more than I know about nakshatras. And so, but my point is even with my limited knowledge, I felt like these made sense for what he was saying, because this is about starting out on a journey. This is like when the king should or should not journey, right? Which would have been a really important thing if you think about it, right? Because like you were saying, the king is the empire in a sense. The king is the connection, or anciently was the connection between the divine and the terrestrial. And I've actually I made it through the first 3-4 chapters of that Julius Evola book that I told you I was reading. And he does an astounding job of explaining like this mythical king emperor position and how the classically, really classically, the king, Chakravartin. In Sanskrit, right? The king was a type of deity, a real king, right? And we didn't always have real kings, but a real king actually had like these celestial powers, because in a sense
Yes.
he occupied he occupied a station where he was able to like open up this sort of doorway into the higher spheres and bring that down. So the king was the empire, and it's similar to uh, in Shia Islam, the imam, the 12 imams were kind of similar idea, that the imam was an office that a person occupied, and then that power, that divine celestial connection, was passed down to their
Correct.
child through through their line. So it's similar.
And according to tradition, well, in the traditional past, the king was also the pontifex, right? The idea of the person who created the bridge between the spiritual world and the material world,
Right.
among other things. But with the progression of time, that position became divided into what would be like the Kshatriya king and the Brahmanic priest or Brahmanic
Yes,
spiritual.
right. The king was also the priest,
Yeah,
is what you're
but that
saying.
eventually divided.
It
Exactly,
divided, yeah.
it divided into like what would be the Pope and the Emperor, or the Maharaja and I don't know, the Supreme Brahman. There should be a title for it.
Yeah, sure.
The Mahabrahman, yeah, the Mahabrahman.
Right.
Yeah,
Even in the Mahabharata, right, we see a lot of that,
yeah,
where the kings they still defer to the Brahmanas, right? And there's actually there's like a passage where a king like disrespects a Brahmana or something, or his son does, without realizing it, and it causes like a whole a whole pretty big problem. It like becomes like a really big deal. And so, yeah,
yeah.
so that happened a
And
long time
in the
ago.
Western tradition, you have the emperors and the popes, which would be more or less the same traditional thing.
Yeah,
But yeah, yeah. And
cool.
let me tell you, it's just to touch upon this topic of the nakshatras here. It's kind of weird. We have them here, as you mentioned. This might be the idea that the author, this was such a common knowledge that it was unnecessary to write them down. That's a possible hypothesis.
Yeah, because
But
they come from the Vedas, so
yeah, but it's kind of suspicious that they're at the very end of the book, and we're going to see that these chapters once again sound rather have a different tone than
yeah.
others in previous sections, and it's kind of suspicious if you ask me. But for the first time we have nakshatras, and I think we have them all. I don't know if we have. I think we have all 27.
I think so.
Avicii is not mentioned, but I mean, we could extrapolate meanings from this chapter for the nakshatras, which is always very polemic, because as you said, there are people who really study nakshatras a lot, and those might be called experts. But we really don't have any traditional writings on Bharani is this and this and this and this and that, and we really don't have anything related to that other than just the
I think
obscure references we have in Vedas and maybe other scriptures. But in terms of how they work on a horoscopic natal chart,
yeah.
we don't have that.
I think well, I think there's like classical books on Mahurta where like a lot of the
Yes,
stuff was
exactly.
adapted.
Muhurta, exactly.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
adapted to horoscopes, but it wasn't originally for horoscopes. So yeah,
yeah.
nakshatras are kind of being used in an unprecedented way in today's world of Jyotish. I don't think they were ever given
Because
quite the importance in the ancient practices as they are today in the last maybe 100,
probably
200 years.
yeah. Yeah, because the nakshatras were more or less the equivalent of the phases in Western astrology. It was basically something used for muhurtas,
Yeah.
for electional astrology, following the traditional Vedic traditions. That Yotisha was used to make ceremonies, and the
Yeah.
nakshatras were used to make ceremonies, not necessarily to superimpose them in a natal horoscopic chart, which probably is a further development, a posterior development in terms of the
Yeah.
astrological part. So
Yeah,
we
I think
could
so.
talk about nakshatras later on, but this is the first time, and this is
Yeah.
something big. I mean, this is the only part of the book where we see this. I mean, this is
Yeah.
exciting
Well,
for
and yeah,
all of you nerds out there.
it is. Yeah. And I wanted to point out too here, I found another deity association that is, I know,
Yama
right?
is
Yama with
yeah,
Bharani and Petries with Magha. And then also
yeah,
down here,
that's correct. Yeah,
Agni with
those are
Kritika.
the easy ones.
So just for fun.
Agni is Kritika.
Yeah.
Yes, Agni is Kritika. Yes.
Um, and I do want to mention too that we actually did have nakshatras mentioned briefly in the very first page, first chapter of this text. They do mention them and they do give a couple names, but it's sort of like, and you should already know this, so we're going to just skip over it.
Infer, yes.
So yeah. But yeah, then we don't get them till here, it's just like all the way at the beginning, all the way at the end. And again, this chapter is mainly about, journeys for kings, but it could be applied fruitfully, I think, to anybody's journeys. Some very good stuff in here. They seem to favor angles and upachaya places being in good condition and stuff like that. So that's kind of the crux of the chapter. There's not much else to really say about it. But yeah, right here, right, we get the TDs really quick in 25, 26, a few TDs.
And we're gonna get a lot of TTs after this chapter in terms of how they measure the planets in the further astronomical chapters that we're gonna read.
Yeah, cool. All right, so chapter 74. This is like the signs rising for a journey, and specifically in relationship to warfare, it seems like.
And people have to remember, astrology has always been a part of warfare.
Yeah.
And,
big time.
And even to this day, I've heard of anecdotal references of using astrology in the Second World War. So, this is not something that out of date. Still people use these type of things.
That's Uranian astrology was developed to predict artillery strikes in World War I or II. I think World War II.
He figured it out in World War One.
He figured it out in wow.
Yeah, and then it was in the 20s where he developed it further. But
wow.
But this still is relevant in many ways, and magical warfare is still a thing without a doubt.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Sagittarius again, missiles. I love that. I just love that, the Sagittarius missiles thing.
Well, yeah, the arrows. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, the arrows, right? And it's all pretty straightforward. The more I read this too, the more I realize that he really gives a cruel quality to the sun along with Mars and Saturn. So for him, the three most malefic planets are Sun, Mars, and Saturn, and it seems like the sun is like tyrannical and cruel and selfish in many respects. Mars is very like belligerent and chaotic and just sort of like thievish and maniacal. And then Saturn is just really oppressive and like hateful and avaricious and whatnot in the way that he delineates in most of these chapters. So that's why Leo, one should set forth to destroy cities, villages, deer, because deer are like so innocent and sweet, enemies to fight battles and perform harsh and terrible deeds. And as much as the no planet is like intrinsically evil or anything, I was recently reading a horoscope to help out somebody just to like they want to help delineating it, and they were asking, we were just looking at it. It was somebody else's chart, and like they had the sun ruling the 7th in the 4th, and the 4th was Taurus, and K2 was in the 7th as well. So, but putting those two together, I just got this vibe that the guy was like selfish, cruel, and hoarded wealth. And apparently that was spot on. Like he literally hoarded wealth and stuff. And he was just like, and apparently he was physically violent too, like physically abusive and stuff. So,
but since it's in the 4th in Taurus, maybe it's because he was raised that way. His mother or his family?
This was the wife's chart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
maybe delineating the husband.
The mother of the wife gave her that idea that she should hoard wealth, or maybe that's something she was raised with.
No, it was her husband that was hoarding it.
Well, yeah, maybe the father or the mother of the whoever's chart that is, maybe the idea of the home life, or
Giving
because
undue
if,
importance. Yeah.
because if the sun is in Taurus, the sun tends to like that position. The person tends to listen a lot to other people close to them more than to themselves, in
Yeah,
my
that makes
opinion.
sense. Yeah, because it's Venus, and Venus,
Yeah,
wants you to like relate and take in.
yeah,
Yeah, and especially in Libra, of course, where the sun's
yeah,
debilitated,
yeah. Libra, it's even worse. Yeah.
huge, and yeah. So no, I can see that to a certain extent. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it was just interesting though, because it's like, yeah, the sun, the sun can really be a cruel son of a bitch for sure.
Well, yeah. I mean,
He
and it,
purifies. He
yeah,
purifies things. So
and it follows Vedic tradition.
yeah,
Vedic tradition, the malefics, and it's a mild. They always describe it as a mild malefic, because it's necessary for our individuality and our our sense of being. And what the sun does, it takes us away from the things and people who really do not have anything to do with our own expression of self,
yeah.
and that can be bad for other people, just as malefics are bad, might be bad to other people but good to ourselves. Specifically, strong Mars is
Oh
very
yeah.
dangerous for people but very good for us. But yeah,
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, it's always interesting to contemplate that stuff further. Okay, so chapter 75, which was more about expeditions, right? I mean, it's
yes,
kind of
and we,
spending
we
a lot on that, yeah.
yeah, and we are talking here about planets and days and how they can affect in terms of an electional muhurta,
Yes,
how
he
the
goes into
expedition.
days.
Yeah, yeah, which is very interesting. I mean, we on normal astrologer would think that the best day to do war would obviously be Tuesdays, but he gives different. I mean, it's reasonable what he says. I mean, obviously you associate Tuesday with Mars, Wednesday with Mercury, and so on and so forth. And so the significations of the days where you go out have a close relationship to the planetary significators.
And I think, yeah, you were asking me about this before we started. Like, what does it
Space.
mean, planet faces? I actually think that's in the descendant, because if you notice,
Uh,
right, whoever sets forth with Venus in front of him, like he's seeing it, right?
the
Even
West.
even though all the other planets face him, he's destroyed and loses treasures, right? But if the sun's at his back, like shining at his back, that's to me the ascendant. Because then it says Jupiter in the descendant, right? He loses his best vehicles. So yeah, I think it's like, whatever's in the seventh is something you could potentially lose in a journey or in a battle or in a confrontation. And then he talks about the moon's nakshatra being afflicted. So again, a little
This
mention
is
of
the
nakshatra.
first time, but this is the first time in 75-6, right? Yeah, 75
Yeah.
6, where we see the word nakshatra.
Yeah. So yeah. It's great. Okay. So then he starts with Thursday for whatever instead of Monday. But he does do all the days.
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was weird, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So he sets out on Thursday, Jupiter Day, right? It's good stuff. Friday's good stuff for women and clothes and sex. Wednesday, Mercury, right? He obtains prosperity from wise men, so on. Sunday, though, right, gets hunger and thirst and pain and quarrels. And, because again, the sun being more malefic for this author. Monday, right, he's joined with saintly women and gets food and drink and sex again and water. Tuesday, he gets wounds from poison, fire, swords, quarrels. And Saturday, obtains diseases, crushing by vile people on the road. Intense fear of thieves and foes in the wilderness. I think that's a really I like this little statement here, because it really it kind of reminds me too of like wild animals. There's something about Saturn and being banished to like a dark, dangerous
Yeah.
place. So just little things like that are fun to pick up in these old texts, like little gems like that. And then this was interesting, right? Like he kind of contradicts himself a bit here. When the Lord of the days are strong or in their own Vargas, they have the influences that has been indicated. But if they're, weak, right, they destroy the appearance of those results, both the good ones and the bad. And again, I prefer to just stick to the classical idea that when a planet is in its own dignity, right, and otherwise unafflicted, it's going to produce the more, quote unquote, good thing.
results.
But I will say that, like, especially for malefics, if you've got a malefic in its own sign, but it's retrograde and it's in one of the dark houses, like the 2nd, 8th, 6th, or 12th, that can actually be very, very malefic, even though it's in its own sign. I've seen that be extremely malefic. Um, so again, even if a planet's in its own sign or Varga, you still have to check because it could still be afflicted in another way. It could still be accidentally malefic, especially if it rules malefic houses and it's like retrograde. And actually, he talks about retrograde in here a little later on.
Yeah.
And it's different from how a lot of later Jyotish looks at it. It's more like Hellenistic, where it's kind of dreadful or it's kind of upsetting. So we'll have to find that again when we get to it. But did you want to say anything?
He uses, about this chapter, no. I said the thing about the nakshatras.
Okay.
And he uses Sanskrit word for retrogradation here. Yeah. Which is
okay.
Varka. I forgot. But yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll find it.
Chapter 76 is just permutations of the same thing. He goes over natal positions with electional positions,
right?
Planet, and it's kind of repetitive because we have seen like 3 different chapters on the effects of the ascendant sign on horary.
Yeah,
and it's kind of
right.
repetitive. It's like in the middle part of this chapter, but it's kind of repetitive already. It would be interesting to make a research about the different positions with the Lagna in terms of what Yavanajataka says in all these 3 different sections.
Yeah.
To analyze them. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So yeah, again, as Fernando was saying, just to reiterate it, right? He's just going through if like your ascendant is in this house in like a prajna or an electional chart, I guess in this case, because we're looking at journeys, electional charts for journeys. And then, yeah, it goes on to do the planets. Like when he goes forth when Jupiter is in the ascendant, and it's just pretty general stuff. This isn't even related to the nativity at this point. And then at some point, does he talk about the natal planets with the horary or no? Did I make that up?
No, he just talks about the houses.
Okay, he just talks about, then he talks about, so these planets in the ascendant and then these planets in all the houses. And, it's good stuff to look at. Like, it's a great reference if you're doing a lot of muhurta for people or for yourself or journeys or really anything, actually. It's a great little reference, and you can see how, how things come up. I don't know if it's in this chapter, but there was another chapter or a shloka where he mentions, like, for a king, the houses. Oh, yeah, it's over here. Okay, so we'll get to that in a bit. But, yeah, I just wanted to say something about that when we get to it. Oh, yeah.
These are just permutations upon permutations. It's very interesting, as you said.
Yeah. So it's worth having a look at, I think, for sure. I really enjoyed reading it. But yeah, this was interesting for the king, that his army is ruled by the 3rd house. I really liked that for some reason. Because really
it's like the arm of the king, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, maybe that's pretty brilliant. I didn't even think of that. The arm of the king. Yeah, I just thought about like how the 3rd is like, it's like moving. It's kind of Martian. Has like a martial kind of vibe to it.
Short trips. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just was like, oh, that's really cool. I really like that. That could come in handy in a delineation. Not that I don't think I'll ever be doing this for like military people, but I guess you never know,
That's where the money is, Lars.
Yeah, right? Like just go work for Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, Lockheed Martin, Astrological Division.
I've got the highest security clearance for the Pentagon. Like I've got the highest ever. Like, oh yeah.
What's the other one? The competition of Lockheed Martin at the...
I don't know.
Yeah. That's where the money is. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to have like an astrological division in one of these military industrial complex companies?
It would be pretty cool, yeah, in some ways for sure, especially if we lived in a more like sci-fi style world.
They probably do. I mean, not necessarily these companies, because these companies is more about the technical stuff, but I'm pretty sure the Department of State or the State Department or some of these agencies in Washington gotta have somebody who, like, a Rasputin type of person who deals with these things in terms of applying military policy or something. And obviously, And obviously politicians have their own esoteric advisors, not
I think so.
everybody, but some have to. Obviously we can cite the famous example of
Ronald
Ronald
Reagan.
Reagan, and also this Canadian prime minister that was very famous in the 30s and 40s. I don't
Cool. Huh.
He was very esoteric. He was very
Neat.
superstitious. I forgot his name.
Okay.
Continue. I'm going to look it up.
Okay. So the other thing I liked about this too is that we can extrapolate some more insights into the houses in general from these. They're just very good. So like the army reminds me of how the third house can also be associated with like tools, which was actually done by a modern 20th century astrologer, Mark Edmund Jones. There's a book where he says the third house rules all kinds of tools. And so, you see kind of a basis for that in this ancient text. So I like finding those confluences and whatnot. Eighth house, his weaker points, right? That goes for all of us, I think. The eighth house, it's about longevity, right? So it's also deals with like challenges to that longevity and like weaknesses. Absolutely. It's places we're afraid to go or that are unknown to ourselves.
The prime minister was called Mackenzie King. Canadians
King.
are totally gonna. He was very famous. Yeah, he was
Cool.
like
maybe I'll look at him.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then the ninth, his mental state. This is a very good way to interpret the ninth house, is just sort of like how a person thinks about things, their perception of things. It's definitely, I mean, it's not commonly what we see for the ninth house, but I think when you really sum it up, the ninth house really does have a lot to do with how we perceive things, like our philosophical approach to life. Are we pessimistic? Are we optimistic? Are we more centrist? Are we, and then even getting into politics, you could probably extrapolate something from that too. 10th, his deeds. 11th, his profits. Is pretty standard. But then 12th, his lies. I love this one because, yes, the 12th house has been called the place of self-undoing by medieval astrologers. And the 12th house does contain a lot of things about how we lie to ourselves. I think that's a great way to use it. So when you delineate
from a psychological point of view,
yeah, when you're delineating for someone, right, you don't have to get all doom and gloom on the 12th, but you can look at it and say, oh yeah, this person lies to themselves about this area of life, and you can extrapolate quite a lot from that, I think. So, and the 12th and 8th have both been called houses of secrets the person keeps, and even the 4th has to do with secretive activity as well. These water houses, these moksha houses,
True.
So or the 4th is more private. It's not so much about lies or
the home life. Yeah, the home life.
It's private though. It's like what you do in private. So anyway, cool. I just really like stuff like that. To me, these are the gems of these old texts, when it's like super simple and straightforward and you can extrapolate quite a lot from it. So
very true. Very true.
Okay, and then he talks about like the king's ascendant in the place of, sixth place of the enemy's horoscope, and he kind of does a little bit of mixing and whatnot. And then he does start mixing the planets, right? Like Jupiter is in the ascendant in an upachaya of his birth ascendant. So like if Jupiter was in the ascendant of the muhurta and that was like your third house, or your sixth house, or 11th or 10th or whatever. So it gets pretty interesting there. And these are kind of yogas for success, right? And failure, for like conquering and journeying and stuff. So that's all that is. And then, he talks about, horas a bit, and navamshas and decadence and
very intrinsic. Yeah.
Yeah, very intrinsic. And then he gives like a little, I don't know, kind of summation here of how this all sort of works, and how the king is victorious or not, I guess. And then he just goes into this whole thing about like goats and animals and horses and men and drums and cheese and not cheese, geese. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of fizzles out here at the end. So okay, chapter 77.
Fizzles out. Yeah, that's a great way. Chapter 77, what we have here is basically the actions to be taken each day and he then has he
The
puts some
deities.
emphasis, yes, and he puts some emphasis on benefics in relation to benefic action, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and he even talks about like you know, if you want to do these horrible things, this is how to do them and be successful.
Yeah,
Right? Like on Tuesday, pray to Skanda and just go out and lie and riot and obstruct and poison and kill.
because it's the day of Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So kind of some potential black magic stuff there.
yeah. I mean, there's always a space to do those things.
See, on Saturday, one should do things involving poison boulders. I love this. Boulders. Things involving boulders. Hey guys,
Like
I'm gonna go
you're
do.
pushing a boulder.
Yeah, exactly. Hey guys, I'm gonna do some boulder related stuff today. Don't worry about it. I'm not crushing anyone or killing anyone. Just boulder related stuff.
Like this movie, Lord of the Flies. Did you see the movie
Oh
where they kill
yeah,
a kid
God,
pushing a stone?
man, I
Yeah,
read the book too. The book is just as brutal.
yeah, that's an amazing book. Yeah, it's an
Yeah, it
amazing.
is. It's incredible.
It's how man can, well, humans can de-evolve into like savages when they're not, part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, it's very Sun, Saturn, Mars to me, that whole book.
Oh,
You know?
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, again, talking about Dwadasamshas and the different angles and, you know, some more yogas for just these things. I don't know. I don't really have too much to say about this part.
Me neither. We can just go on. I mean, these are basically, the things you should do each day. And like I said, he emphasizes benefic positions for benefic actions afterwards.
Yeah, and you can actually get a whole summation in these last two shlokas where he just summarizes the actions that are good for each planet, you know, that each planet supports and whatnot. And again, some of these are really pretty horrible, like murder with Saturn. So I'm not
Yeah, I
weird.
mean, and this is common knowledge. I mean,
Yeah.
people say also that when Saturn is direct, which happens like 3 days before he goes retrograde and after he goes retrograde, that
Okay.
you basically do anything and it will not record itself as karma. Like you're free of the karmic law. So if you want to do
Okay.
something bad, you can do
I don't
it.
know about that.
Yeah, that's what some Indians say. But I mean,
I
I
think
don't
it all
know about.
depends on the person. You know, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
I
If
mean,
you
there's always space for this because you rationalize it and
yeah.
you do your works and everything, but there's always space for that.
I mean, this is
Obviously,
what the scapegoat is for.
yeah, and there's gonna be consequences to all of your actions. So it's when you get into these magical topics, it's relativity is very present in almost everything. It's what you create with your mind many times. What
Yeah.
really is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so chapter 78. I don't remember
Well,
what this was about.
here basically you have modalities of the signs. It's like the first time he kind of addresses the modalities, which is interesting. Well, he has addressed them before, but like talking about them, specifically. And he also takes into consideration, sign of the ascendant to take action. So once again, we see the same thing once again of the ascendant in terms of how it may contribute to a certain type of action. And then he talks about the years of the planets
Yeah.
in relation to this, which I kind of didn't understand that. I think he means perfection or Lord of the Year, which would be
Maybe.
natal. I don't know. Because I don't know how that would apply to mundane astrology.
Sure.
Maybe in terms of the vernal equinox, the ruling planet in that chart, but I don't know. But yeah,
Okay.
it's basically we're kind of reviewing things that we already seen before.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he goes on to yeah, this could be very useful for perfections, but of course it's more it's not so specific necessarily to nativities, but right then a year of the sun, a year of the moon, a year of each planet, and it seems to be more about like maybe what may be involved for a kingdom or an empire, right?
Correct.
So a year of the moon involves excellent grains, grasses, shrubs, and rice, right? Full-grown thickets and so on. Maybe this is this reminds me so much too of that. I think it's in the biblical story of is it Joseph who like ends up being betrayed by his brothers, and he goes to Egypt and he eventually becomes the counselor to the Pharaoh?
Jacob and Esau.
Or is it Jacob?
Jacob and Esau, the two brothers. That I don't know.
No,
I don't
no, I
remember.
think it might be Joseph or Yusuf, right? Is like
But Joseph was Jesus' father, no?
no, in the Hebrew.
Oh, Old Testament. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Hebrew Bible. The story is basically that he's betrayed by his brothers and he becomes imprisoned and stuff, and because he was the favorite of his father. But eventually, he becomes the advisor to the Pharaoh in Egypt. He becomes like he has this high position, and he ends up saving his family because of his high position later on. But it reminds me of the dream he had was like seven. It was like seven. It was like seven thick, healthy cows followed by like seven really thin cows. And he interpreted it as like, I think it was the Pharaoh's dream. It wasn't his, but he interpreted it as, this is like 7 years of prosperity followed by 7 years of famine. So if you do these things in this 7 years, right, you'll have prosperity. And then when the 7 years of famine come, you'll retain that prosperity, and your kingdom will prosper and so on. And it just reminds me of that, because it's almost like the cow, right, and Taurus and the moon's representation there. And it's like, this really reminds me of that story, because it's like
that's a very nice anecdote. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's all this abundance in the year of the moon here for the empire. That's pretty cool. So, okay. Anyway. Chapter 79, which was really weird.
79 is a weird chapter because it's the type of chapter that should be in the beginning of the book and not at the very end.
I didn't like it.
And it's basically astronomical information. He starts with like there are Yugas, and he starts talking about measuring the movement of the planets, measuring them in deities. We are familiar with Yugas in terms of these big Vedic cycles, but apparently here Yugas basically mean like periods of time.
165 years for some reason.
Exactly, 165 years. And he talks once again movement of the planets, and he measures them through deities. Yeah. And basically astronomical calculations, and at the very end he dedicates the book, which is quite obvious. But these are like a mathematical portion of the book that once again it's kind of off tone from the rest of the book. This is a very weird book because in several occasions it feels like it doesn't. There are several parts that kind of don't feel part of the whole.
Doesn't quite fit. Yeah, and I would love it if somebody one day who is more of this kind of mind goes through this chapter and like actually works everything out that he's saying and presents it and explains it to see if there's really something here. Because I just even though I'm a Virgo ascendant, I don't have the patience to do something like this. I'm just forget it.
I could have the patience, but I would rather do it with the original Sanskrit than with the translation.
True. Yeah,
because
you would have
that's where the nitty-gritty is. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this doesn't interest me to study. I would rather read somebody else's study of it. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm getting over it.
You need to know Sanskrit to delve into these parts, as we've mentioned before in the part of the syllables with the horary. I mean, you need Sanskrit, and this is why this is where the term lost in translation comes in. I'm not saying that this is a mediocre translation, far from that. What I'm saying is that if you really want to analyze it, you got to go to the prime source. And, it's kind of confusing. There are a lot of mathematical calculations, and he basically is explaining the movement of the planets, which in Europe wasn't really set in stone until very late, 15th, 16th century. I mean, this is very interesting stuff also. So, it would be nice, as you said, for a person to really sit down and do the work and examine this and other type of chapters that deal with these mathematical permutations.
Yeah, that would be cool. So I await for that person. They'll be my
He's
my
probably
prince in shining armor.
he's probably watching this video. He's like 12 years old and he's watching it right now.
I hope so, right? Or she. So anyway, after all that mashugana, we get
Mashugana.
we get a reference to combustion and the planets being visible after a certain number of degrees. And this is I think this is pretty much the same as it is in later texts. And I'm not sure, but it probably bears some similarity to what the Persians say as well, too. I've never really used this. I've just always said like 8.5 degrees for each planet.
You mean the orbs of the orbs of combustion? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I want to try using this though for for the hell of it, you know. It's just interesting. I'm sure there's an astronomical basis for it. I don't quite know what it is, but I could understand Mercury remaining combust for longer than the other planets. I could even understand Mars too, because his like retrograde and stuff is very rare, and so there's probably something in that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the full explanation for these orbs, to be honest. Okay, then in 51, retrograde.
Retrograde, yep.
And then let's see where does it talk about it? There was a part where it talked about retrograde being kind of difficult. Oh, I hope we didn't miss it. Oh well, might have missed it.
Didn't you write down the shloka? No,
I didn't. I'm bad.
Oh, okay.
Dang it.
I don't remember it.
Huh. Oh, let me just go back real quick and see. Oh, no, that went forward.
No.
It could be down here. I don't think it is, actually, looking at that. There was a part, I swear to God, where it was just saying something about retrograde being kind of like chaotic and difficult.
Which kind of makes more reference to Hellenistic techniques. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. They become extremely distressed because of the retrogression.
Yeah, the idea of going back. And people should know that sometimes in Vedic astrology, retrogression is associated with tamasic disposition in terms of the gunas.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and the way I use retrogradation is not that the planet becomes weak, like some texts say, but that the planet becomes incredibly strong, but incredibly unwieldy and counterbalanced. They have like too much. They're too much of what they are. So Jupiter, like for example, Jupiter is retrograde and exalted in the chart of Billy Graham, who was Billy Graham, a big, Baptist or whatever.
The father of all modern televangelists.
Yeah. And he's not somebody I really care for, but I was looking at his chart one day because it's interesting. And I think Jupiter even rules the 9th house as well in that chart. And, this is a person who is a religious extremist, right? Jupiter retrograde. This is a person who is so obsessed with things being the right way and according to this particular version of a religious doctrine and stuff that, to me, that's unbalanced. However, Jupiter's not weak. Jupiter's very strong. Jupiter's in an angle retrograde in Cancer, right? So he was very famous for being this religious zealot kind of person,
And
so,
let me tell you how I explain retrogression. As you said, retrograde planets are strong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I see it in two ways. They're strong, but one, they have a tamasic disposition, so they're very concentrated. They're very their mind or their will is very set on having something, right?
Okay.
Sattvic predisposition is just being, Rajasic is just doing, and Tamasic is just having,
Mm-hmm.
They're strong, but they're like going back, they want to do something, they want to have something because they couldn't do it. And I compare it like with Moby Dick, like the captain, Captain Ahab, the idea of like, if you leave things alone, things will manifest themselves. But when you have a retrograde planet, you're just on top of things and you're like, I want to do this, and you fuck them up.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like the captain in Moby Dick, like he destroys the whole the whole boat because he wanted to take revenge, right? He
Yeah.
wanted to go back.
He wanted
And
to go back.
basically,
Yeah, retrograde.
that's basically a retrograde. And I mean, it doesn't spell catastrophe, obviously, but it spells a certain type of, overemphasis on that planet.
Yeah, the retrograde.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, sure.
Kind of interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, whatever.
Okay. All right. Like retrograde, to add to what you were just saying, it's kind of like the retrograde planet person, right? Is the person who starts to do something, but then goes, wait a second, I can't do this, or something's not right, or
but he keeps on doing it,
and then gets obsessed with it or whatever. Like, actually, the best psychological explanations of retrograde come from Dane Rudyard's work, in my experience, at least, and he really does a great job of explaining like how retrograde planets can manifest, like, and he also does before the opposition with the sun for the superiors and after the opposition. So he actually approaches it from a very classical, traditional perspective, but just in more psychological terms, so it's very interesting stuff for those who are still exploring retrograde. There's a lot of misinformation about retrograde. And,
definitely.
And so, I think everything we're saying here is we're presenting right now a more holistic way to look at it than just
let people know that retrogradation is not disaster. Dignity for me is much more important, and even house placement than the movement of the planets. Of course, when you have a stationary planet, you're dealing with something special right there. But powerful, a retrograde planet, a very powerful planet. But a retrograde planet, it's more or less, and the most common example is Mercury retrograde, obviously, because he's the most common retrograde. And basically Mercury retrograde is somebody who doesn't stop thinking, who doesn't stop using their mind, and does not leave things alone. That's my explanation of how I see it. I would rather read those Rudyard's references you're telling me, because I guess that's what it is. It's just the inability of just letting things just be, which would be the opposite of which would be like an exaggeration of a Rajasic disposition. Rajasic is just plain, you're just being a human. Tamasic is you're being too human. And Sattvic would be like you are a saint, right?
You're a saint. Right.
It's always very interesting how the classics, specifically now that I'm reading more Hellenistic, how they treat retrogrades. But for me, the really special case are stationary planets. For me, those are the real nuggets of wow. Usually I see stationary planet in a chart and I get excited because I want to know what it means more than anything else.
Yeah, I think Jung had a stationary Mars elevated.
Oh, look at that.
For example.
I kind of have a stationary Mercury, for example.
Oh, okay.
So, I've always been interesting on stationary planets more than retrogrades. But yeah, that's the way I see them. I don't know. Was my explanation like that from Rudyard, or
I mean, Rudyard talks about all that stuff, and it's not too dissimilar in a way from what he says. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot in common between your perspective and his, I think. I think you would be pleasantly surprised. I think the best book where he talks about them is in his book on aspects, which is a very intricate, esoteric book on aspects. But yeah, he has a whole section on retrogrades, and he gave a lot of attention to like Oriental and Occidental Venus and Mercury, as well as Oriental and Occidental while retrograde. So he actually has like 4.
Okay.
He basically gives,
how would that work? That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he gives 4 ways of basically 4 types of Venuses and Mercuries. So
wow.
And this technique works fantastically. I can't tell you how many times I've when I'm reading a new author, I'm like, oh, I bet he has a Occidental Mercury, and then it's true. Or I bet he has an Oriental Mercury, and then it's true. It's really, really interesting.
Just for people to know, Oriental would be that, let's say the sun is in the 10th house, and Oriental would be that the planet is is east. So if the
No,
right,
no, no, no. It would be
no.
if the planet's earlier in the signs of the zodiac, because Oriental means it's rising before the sun rose.
Oh, so it's in the west.
Yeah, and Occidental means that, well, it doesn't have to be it would be in the west from that
The
position.
sun,
Yeah.
from the sun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from that position. But
So if the sun is in the 10th, an Oriental planet has to be in the 9th, 8th, or 7th from it.
yeah, right. So
Or even more until the 4th house. Yeah.
well, the idea, yeah, so the idea is that that planet is appearing visibly in the morning, in the dawn, whereas the Occidental planet rising after the sun is making its appearance in the evening, in the dusk, you know?
Yeah.
So this is like one of my favorite techniques in astrology, but we'd have to do another video to really go into it. So anyway, back to this, right? A nice aside, but back to this. He kind of ends with, you know, kind of talking about Prajapati and the creation of things. And he also says down here in 59 that the Ashwini, or he seems to imply that, yeah, Ashwini is at the beginning of the circle of the signs, which is the body of Kala. So putting Ashwini as the first nakshatra in Aries.
At the very end of the book.
Yeah, at the very end of the book. But
a book that just mentioned nakshatras 2 shlokas ago.
Yeah.
Or 3.
Ridiculous.
I'm sorry, six shlokas ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do wanna make mention of the fact that, you know, in the Vedas, Kritika is the first nakshatra.
Yeah, which is
not
very common for the debate of the zodiacs. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, we just
and
have.
It makes sense because of and it makes sense also because of Bharani being
death
by Jama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the last one. So
the last one
makes a lot of sense. And then the beginning of things is fire, Agni, Kritika. So anyway, I just like to mention that. But then he talks about how Yavanashvara, the supposed author, received this information directly from the sun, right? So it's kind of echoing some like Vedic mythos, I think.
Yeah.
And then Spujit Vaja, who versified this entire text, was seen by him in the year 191 in 4,000 Indra Vajra verses. And then in the Yavanajataka, the rules relating to horoscopy are completed. So I guess that's it.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's how the classic crumbles.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's how the classic crumbles.
Yeah. Well, Lars, I mean, first of all, I want to congratulate if there are, to all those lunatics out there who saw all of the videos, congratulations. Yeah. We're going to mail you some magic mushrooms through the mail as a present for, staying with us all this time. And we're probably going to, send some juice boxes also with that. And
juice boxes?
Yeah, I don't know. Conclusions, Lars. I have a couple of things I want to say.
Sure.
This was an interesting book. I've never really read the whole book from cover to cover or from PDF to PDF.
Yeah.
Some interesting points. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points I want to mention. Number one, there is absolutely no mention of the nodes in Yavanajataka.
Yeah, 0.
We saw eclipses right in the last chapters, which we haven't mentioned in this video. There's no mention of Rahu and Ketu. There's not even a mention of eclipses more than the thing we saw, and he doesn't even mention the nodes there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. Another point, second point, there's very little references to other authors. There's very little references to classical authors. I mean, there's no reference to authors you sometimes see references in Hellenistic texts. You sometimes see references in Vedic texts. But in Yavanajataka, I really don't see any reference other than, the one who wrote it, the references to the Greeks.
Yeah.
But who are these Greeks,
These mysterious Yavanas, right? Yeah.
The third point is there's very little Vedic reference, to be honest. There are Sanskrit words. There are a lot of references to words that relate to Vedic spirituality, but Vedic texts, very little. and the parts we saw it kind of seemed out of place.
Yeah.
So that's another, and at the same time, there's not a lot of references to like traditional Hellenistic spirituality. So one might think that maybe, I don't know, the references to the authors or the religious things were taken out or added. I don't know. That's just wild hypothesis here. The fourth point is, once again, very little mention of nakshatras. And when they are mentioned, they are like, once again, out of place.
Yeah.
And there are references, to be fair, there are references to Navamshas in terms of the 9 parts, which have to do with nakshatras in the modern context.
Yeah.
But, nakshatras are seldom mentioned. And once again, they're mentioned in the electional astrology context, on the muhurta context, which once again reinforces the idea that nakshatras are more for muhurtas, for more electional astrology than natal. What's the Greek word?
Oh gosh, I tried to pronounce that last night.
Genetalogical.
Yeah, like genesis, generation, gender, gene, genetalogical. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, you got cut off. And 2 more points. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th point is that we see this in the very first chapters. We see a different scheme in approaching horoscopy. We see different friendship scheme. We see a proto-Chatvala. We see this idea of using the Navamsha and the D12 and the Rashi as a sort of system to verify dignity and the predisposition of planets, which is something that we're not going to see, for example, in Parashara. The friendship scheme is different. Chatvala is a little bit more refined. And obviously, we seldom see references to the D12 in Parashara, other than it's used as a varga for parents, right?
Yeah, although I was skimming.
Parents, right? D12 is for, D12 is parents, right? Yeah.
I was skimming through some.
And what are you going to say? I'm sorry.
I was skimming through some Varaharamira texts, and he actually mentions a lot of things that are similar to Yavanajataka. It seems like mentions D12 a bit more. He mentions the Trimsamshas, right, and using them more like Yavanajataka. But what I also find so interesting about Yavanajataka, I just realized this, is he spends like a good amount of time delineating the Saptamshas, and then you never see them referenced again. You see Dwadasamshas, Decan, Horas, and Navamshas mentioned quite frequently throughout the rest of the text, but Saptamshas barely, Trimsamshas barely, even though, they're more important earlier on.
And we also saw the faces of the Hora, which is kind of weird.
I love those. Chapters. Yeah, they're so
which is something that, and I mean, it's
strange.
It's a book where you have a lot of things that are not going to be seen again. And finally, which was kind of interesting for me, and I've mentioned this in previous videos. People say this is a very old book, but there's a lot of horary in it, especially after the second half.
Yeah,
and astrology is more of a modern. Well, I don't want to say a modern, but it's a more recent development in astrology.
Yeah,
and that kind of also raises the question that this first Yotish book is not as old as some people want to think, especially in the Indian community.
Very possibly, yeah. Very possible.
Those are the main points I wanna convey, especially the notes, which was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, another text that makes no mention of them is Firmicus Maternus's text, which is supposedly he was from Sicily. So, kind of a skip and a jump away from India, but still it's like we find a couple old classical texts where the notes aren't mentioned at all. It's like, what the heck? Weird, because they were very prevalent in the ancient world. They were.
Maybe since the nodes were relevant to eclipses.
Yeah.
And eclipses were like really big events that you could use to manipulate people or whatever. Maybe it was like a hidden secret. I don't know. I'm just throwing out.
Maybe some astrologers just didn't feel like the nodes
didn't want to talk about it.
Or didn't feel like they were important unless there was an eclipse in the birth chart, chart, right? So I don't know. It could be something.
Which once again further emphasizes our thesis that the nodes as significator of past and future lives is just something that's very recent rather than something which is very old.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those are the main points I wanted to convey. I don't know. I mean, I had a great experience with this book in
Yeah, it
terms
was
of
fun.
doing it. Nobody has done this in YouTube, so I hope people
Yeah.
enjoy it. I don't know what you want to say, Mr. Panaro.
I think just that, you know, this is the first time I've actually read one of these texts beginning to end, like in a linear fashion. And that I think there's, you know, there's something to be gained from that, but there's, I think, a lot more to be gained from just reading passages of it and testing the techniques. You'll learn, for those of you that are learning, you'll learn more doing that, you know. And we did it this way, obviously, because we're making this video series. So yeah, it was just like an interesting experience to do that. And I've always just read passages from these old texts, like at random. I'll look up, oh, what does he say about career? What does he say about religion? What does this author say about, you know, medicine, and so on. So yeah, I think that's it. That's
Oh, okay, you got cut there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. It was glitching a little
So,
bit.
for everybody out there, you know, Yavanajataka is really expensive in book form, so we don't recommend you buy it. So
Yeah.
just get it on PDF. You can get it in archive.com. And anything else,
Cool.
Lars, or are we finished?
I think we're finished.
So next book. Next book. You know what's the next book?
Parashara, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is gonna take a bigger time, but you know, this is the one. You know, this is the one book that's really gonna be, you know, interesting.
Because and there's also a good PDF version we can use alongside this version.
Oh, sure. And let me tell you, and this is but we gotta use the same version. Yeah, the thing is, let me tell you, and I'm gonna cite Fernando Raul here, and he says this a lot, and he says that, you know, people often cite Parashara, but seldom cite what Parashara recommends for remedies. And that's going to be something very interesting that we're going to see here. You're going to see that in the chapters of the we're going to get there. But, you know, Parashara, we're going to do a book analysis, and I don't think anybody has done it, you know, completely. So that's our next project. But yeah,
cool.
If you want to close it, let's do it.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us on this crazy, wild adventure. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Check out Fernando's YouTube channel as well. Check out our websites, and be jolly. All right. See you next time.